Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the podcast. I'm Esther Littlefield, and today I am here with Holly once again. Hey, Holly, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to be recording today with you.
I know. I'm excited too, because we are actually kicking off a new theme this month, and that theme is simplify. And so we are going to hear from a couple of women about how they've simplified their lives and how that has impacted their leadership. So I'm excited to start this off with you today.
Yeah. So those will be episodes coming up in the month of February, but today we want to start the conversation by talking about the idea of simplify with strategy. The idea is that when you know what to focus on and you have a plan for how to achieve the vision that you're working towards, you are probably going to be a lot more effective, and your team, your coworkers, your partners, your family members will be more effective too. And often I think as leaders of ministries or business owners, or even just in our regular lives, we have these big goals that we want to accomplish. And we can see the vision of where we want to go, but sometimes we get sidetracked and we end up spending a lot of time on things that aren't actually moving us closer to that goal. So if you're listening, I just want to ask, can you relate? And Holly, I would love to know if you can relate with that idea of getting sidetracked easily, even though you have a big vision or a big goal.
Yeah, I can actually totally relate. So, and it's really funny because this happened semi-recently, but I want to say it was November sometime, I met with some people I had met online. They were other business women who worked virtually, and we just had coffee. We were just connecting and that sort of thing. And one of the people was talking about how she had started growing her email list, and she had this really great person that helped her get it started and created all of these different things for her. And I got really excited about it. And she was like, this girl was, just starting out, and she was fairly cheap. Like, you should do this. And so anyway, I had a meeting with that girl, and she was fantastic. And then afterwards, I did my goal planning for 2020. And I realized that was not at all part of really where I wanted to take my business. And so that was definitely me like following the shiny thing and getting distracted. And I mean, that is something that's like good and would be good for my business, but it does not follow any of the objectives that I actually want to carry out for my business for 2020. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for myself, I'm going to give like a little bit more of a just everyday example,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you might be home on a Saturday and you're like, oh, I'm going to clean up my office. And this is something I do, right? I get this great idea of like, I want to clean my office because I love having like a nice blank slate and everything cleared off and put away. And I tend to let things pile up until they get overwhelming. And then I'm just like, I have to get it clean. And so, you're cleaning your office throughout the day, and then you decide, I got to go get a drink of water. So I go to the kitchen to get a drink of water, and I see some dishes on the counter, and then I start putting them away. And then the next thing I know, I'm like completely reorganizing my kitchen cabinets. I don't know. Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. So it's like same thing, like you said, like reorganizing my kitchen cabinets is a great idea and probably is also a project that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But like my vision for the day was to focus on cleaning my office. And I got sidetracked by just kind of moving to a different space and starting to do something different. So
Right.
it was a great idea, but wasn't the thing that I should have been spending my time on that day.
Yeah. And the same thing can happen in your church or your ministry, in your work, in your business. And so today we really wanted to share just a very basic framework for creating a strategic plan for your ministry or your business. And it's also something that you could apply to your personal or your family life as well.
Yeah. So, giving a quick disclaimer on this episode, because I just feel like we should say, because I know we have some amazing women who listen to this podcast and probably some women that are like professional strategic planners. And
Yes.
actually, our 2 episodes just that took place right before this episode were with Tembi Seacrest, and she actually like did strategic planning on like a high government level. So we know that there's women out there who have much more knowledge on this. And you and I, Holly, are not really professionals in this area,
Right.
but we do have some experience and we both kind of have that operational mind and strategic mind when it comes to figuring out how to get goals accomplished.
Hmm.
And I have been through the Director of Operations certification with my friend Natalie Gingrich, who was on one of our previous episodes, and learned her strategic mapping service, which is a trademark service that she created. And I
Hmm.
know, Holly, you're going to be going through that
Yeah.
starting this month, actually, starting in
Yeah.
February.
Yeah.
So,
February. I'm
yeah,
starting that. I'm very excited about it.
yeah. So we just want to say, like, we do have some knowledge, but we are not experts. And so we want to make sure that you know this episode is really meant to be a simple framework that
Mhm.
kind of anybody could take and use for accomplishing their vision or their goal for their business or their ministry life. But if you have a really large organization or if you have more background in this, you probably are going to be using much more advanced techniques than what we're talking about
Mhm.
on this
Yeah.
episode. So, yeah. So, one of the things that you said when we were talking about this was this idea of simplify with strategy. What was your first thought when I said that title of the episode?
I was just like, when I think strategy, I think it's long and complicated, really granular and kind of arduous. So I was intrigued because how am I going to simplify using that when
Yeah.
the process itself seems overwhelming?
Right, right. So, just to give kind of the idea that I had with this is that when you create a plan for doing something, it
Mhm.
actually helps you to simplify your life, your business, your time. We're going to talk about a few reasons why we need a strategic plan, but and that will kind of address this question too. But I just wanted to at the beginning of the year here we're kicking off the month of February and we're going into simplify, and I think usually when we think of simplify we actually tend to think of like the stuff
Yeah.
in our life, right? Which happens to me. I mean, I'm sitting in my walk-in closet and I know that there's stuff in here that I don't need and I need to get rid of. But in the same way, in our ministries, in our businesses, in our churches, in our organizations, a lot of times we end up having kind of clutter build up, or we
Yeah.
end up doing a bunch of things that, like you said, aren't actually going to move us closer to that end result that we want.
Mhm.
So, our goal with this episode is to help you simplify by creating that strategic plan so that you can move forward.
Yeah. So we want to first address, and I think in a little bit more detail and a maybe more specific way, why we actually need to do a strategic plan. And the first thing is time savings. So when you have a strategy or a plan, you're less likely to waste time on things that don't matter. And I mean I think we pretty much covered that, but it's really easy to get about 10% done on 1,000 things than actually finish some one thing 100%. So you're actually going to save time and actually push those initiatives forward much quicker
Yeah.
by strategic planning. So,
Yeah. Another reason that we need it is focus. And again, I kind of already alluded to that, but you are more likely to focus on the things that have the highest return on investment
mhm.
when you take the time to just make that plan in advance instead of just jumping in and starting to do the work. If you make the plan and you kind of know, okay, these are my strengths, these are where I can contribute the greatest investment in our team or organization. And on episode 83 with Tembi Seacrest, she talked about that. And she mentioned the idea of when she was in one of her locations and they asked her to clean the library and organize the library. But after some time of thinking and praying about that, she realized that wasn't actually where God could use her at the highest level and really where she could give the best investment in that organization. So when you have a plan, you know where to focus and how to spend that time that you have.
Right. And I think the next thing that's really big is clarity. So it makes it easier for everyone to know what you're doing, where you're going, and how you should spend your time, your team's time, that sort of thing. It helps kind of as a guideline for those people to be making decisions as well. Sort of like we said, not following the shiny object, but being clear about where we're headed really helps weed out all of that extra stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the fourth reason that we need a strategic plan is stewardship. Essentially, we want to look at this as a way to steward what God has given us, the
mm,
resources, the gifts, the strengths, the skills that we have on our team, in our organizations, that when we actually decide ahead of time or put something on paper ahead of time of how we're going to make use of those resources, we're going to be better stewards of them.
mm,
And also financially, it's more likely that we're not going to be wasting money as well
yeah,
when we create that plan. I mean, it's a similar idea to just a household budget. Like when you
yeah,
actually make a bit of a budget and a plan for where your money's going to go, you are less likely to spend it on things that aren't going to help your family move forward.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So now we've established the reasons and the rationale for this idea of simplify with strategy. So let's get into this concept of actually creating a strategic plan. And I'm actually going way back to my years as a social worker to help us work through this concept. And it might seem strange because social work is not usually associated with strategic planning. But as a caseworker, I worked with kids in foster care as well as kids with behavioral challenges for about 10 years. And throughout that time, I had to write what we called treatment plans. And these plans were essentially the guide that we would use to show what services we were providing to the kids and how we were supporting them towards making improvements in their situations. And so essentially, what I'm going to do is just explain the elements of the plan that we used. And then we're going to walk through a real life example with you of how to map out a strategic plan. And again, totally know that this is like a very basic format of
Mhm.
this and not anything that would be necessarily taught in like a strategic planning course or something like that. So, the plans that we did, though, when I was writing these treatment plans, included a summary of the problems that the child was facing, and it would include sometimes their unique strengths and weaknesses, as well as the overall end goal for the child. Then we would include 2 to 3 goals that we wanted to see the child achieve during that plan period. And then under each goal, we usually had 2 to 3 objectives where we were identifying kind of smaller goals that they needed to have during that time. And then we also would talk about who was responsible for each of the objectives. So it would identify who was going to work on this with the child. Sometimes it was the parent, sometimes it was a foster parent, or it was me in some cases. And then lastly, there was always a time frame established for the plan. So usually for our plans, it was 90 days. And the idea was that the goals listed in that plan were ones that could be accomplished within that 90-day period. And so it actually wasn't until I was thinking about doing this episode when I started thinking back to my years as a social worker and realized that I was actually kind of doing strategic planning at that
Mhm.
time. I never made the connection until the past couple months. And I have since applied these same principles in business, in ministry, and a lot of other areas. But I just thought it'd be cool to go back to that basic format that I used before I even knew it was, kind of strategic planning.
Yeah.
And obviously, we also recognize that creating a plan for one child or one specific situation is much different than making a plan for a big organization or
Yeah.
ministry, but a lot of the same basic principles apply.
Mhm.
So that's what we're using today as our framework to help you create your plan. And we're going to keep it simple, we're going to keep it basic, but you can definitely just Google or research or look up other aspects of strategic planning
Yeah.
because there's a lot more than what we're going to get into. So,
Yeah.
Holly.
So I think to get a better idea of what this looks like, how to use it, we really decided it would be a good idea to use an example from a real project that we actually worked on together at our church. And this was a capital campaign for our church to do some improvements to the building and just to help the ministry grow. So we're going to talk about that campaign and how we did it in the framework that Esther just described. And I think it will give you some legs to this, give you some real life examples to follow along with this. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mentioned this on my episode where I talked about the idea of making a shift, but moving forward, we want to make sure that we're really encouraging you to take action on these episodes and not just listen and say, oh, that was good, and then move on. So at the end, we're going to give you an action step, but I'll give you a sneak peek into what it is. We're going to want you to actually create your own strategic plan.
Yeah. That was a shocker.
So, yeah, I know. So just keep in mind that to get the show notes for this episode, you can go to estherlittlefield.com/episode 85, and the steps will be outlined there. So if you're listening and you can't take notes or you can't write things down, don't worry. You can always go back to the show notes and just jot down the steps that we're talking about and then work on your plan from there. So step 1 is to identify the overall vision. And in episode 26, way back last year, we talked about the idea of creating a vision for the future. And so in this step, you're really going to be doing that. You're going to be painting a picture of the end goal that you want for your ministry, for your business. And again, typically we might be thinking about this in maybe a year time frame, or it could be a 90-day time frame. Sometimes personally, I work off of a year vision and then my plan might be a 90-day plan, but I'm still basing it off of that bigger vision that's for the full year. So when I mentioned the idea of writing the plans for the kids I would work with, we would often have this idea of where we wanted them to end up. And so, for example, if a child was in foster care, the end goal might be that they're going to end up back in their birth home within 6 months. So that might be the vision of where we want to see them go. Or perhaps it's a teenager who's been struggling in school. And so the goal or the end vision is that they're going to be able to graduate high school. So those are just a couple examples. It's really just giving you an idea of where you're going in the future. So in this step, we want you to get down on paper what that overall vision is. So Holly, why don't you walk us through this example of what you talked about, the example that we're going to work through, which was called Planting Hope Together.
Yeah. So Planting Hope Together was the name of the campaign for the capital improvements that we wanted to do at the church. And one of the problems that we really faced at church was our building was hard to navigate. Our children's wing was older. And because it was older and, not current, it gave the perception that the children's ministry wasn't important to us as a church. We really felt that our building itself was not newcomer friendly. And overall, because of all of these things, it was not appealing to our target demographic. The strengths that we had were that we really did already have a great ministry going. Our church is very welcoming and has very down to earth people. And I think that we really were a good place for our target demographic, but our building and our outward appearance was holding us back. So we really were a good place. And I really feel like that was a strength that we had going for us. So our end goal and vision for that campaign and for the church was to be able to grow the church. We wanted to have a new entrance. We wanted to update the children's ministry wing, and we wanted to better engage with the demographic we were trying to reach. So what we really wanted to do was sort of match the outward appearance with the heart of the church so that people on a sort of cursory or first impression would be able to see who we were more quickly.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the other problems that we had was we were kind of stuck at our attendance level. It had kind of just stayed the same for a long time, and we would see new people come and then they would leave. And so there was kind of this, there wasn't, like you said, we weren't holding on to people as well, and we were sort of stuck in this phase, and we knew that we needed to make some changes in order to move forward and really be able to share the love of Jesus with people more effectively by really helping them to come in and feel welcomed and feel comfortable coming to our church.
Exactly.
All right. So thank you for sharing that example. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So step 2, after you've done that, and you heard Holly share like the strengths and weaknesses too. So again, I mentioned the idea of creating that vision, but sometimes you might want to also include that strengths and weaknesses and the problem that you're trying to overcome with your plan.
Yeah. I really think that the strengths and weaknesses can really help you define your vision really well. Because if you don't know the problems that you're facing, sometimes you can just pick a random vision and you're not actually addressing anything. So, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, I really think advise that vision setting. And we do a whole episode
Yeah.
on vision and that sort of thing. But
Right.
I think that that's why it's really important to talk about strengths and weaknesses when you're talking about vision. So,
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, step 2, after you've done that initial vision, is identifying 2 to 3 goals that will help you move towards the vision. So, it can be really tempting, I think, to create 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 goals
yeah.
because most of the time there are that many goals that we probably need to be working on.
Yeah.
But the more I learn about strategic planning and project management and just my own personal life of goal setting is that most of the time, whether individually or as a business or as a ministry, we are more effective when we focus on less things
Mhm.
and focus like you said on finishing them and not
Yeah.
just doing them
Yeah.
halfway.
Yeah.
So that's why we're saying 2 to 3 goals. Okay. So what are the projects or goals that are going to help that vision come to life? And ideally, these are things that are going to be a little bit more specific than just that broad vision. So we're going to identify these 2 to 3 things. So for us, Holly, what was it for the campaign that we talked about?
Yeah. So our three main objectives were we needed to raise money, obviously, because these things don't just magically happen. I mean, if God had wanted to, remodel the church overnight, he absolutely could have, but we're human. So we had to work within what we had. So we defined a specific amount that we needed to raise money. And then we decided that we wanted to build a new entrance for the church. And we had a specific design made for that, that just really simplified actually getting to the sanctuary from the
Yeah.
parking lot.
Yeah. And actually, let me just share one of the challenges we had in our church was you would come in through the back door, which is still the case, but you would come in through a back door and you would walk around a corner and then around another corner. It was like a maze. And then you had to go
Yeah.
up this really narrow staircase and then you'd come into the back of the sanctuary. And there were 2 ways to get into the sanctuary from there. And it was very confusing for somebody coming into the church for the first
Mhm.
time. They didn't know where to go. And so anyway,
Yeah.
I just want to give context for that, why
Right.
we needed the
So,
new entrance.
so building that new entrance really was about welcoming people and about putting our best foot forward right from that first impression. So
Yeah.
that was sort of the reason why we decided on that. And then the third one was to redo the children's wing to sort of give it a makeover. And we had specific ideas for how this would look and what we actually wanted to accomplish. And I say that with the caveat that, the children's wing was not unsafe. It was not,
Yeah.
dirty or anything like that. We had kept it up well, but it really just wasn't current. And for our target demographic, which are 2 income families with multiple kids, more professional people, that's important for them. And that was a big deal. So that was one of the things we identified as an important objective for us to move forward, to really reach those people.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so that was step 2. So we created these bigger goals that we're going to try and accomplish. And then underneath that for step 3, what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 to 3 objectives needed to accomplish each goal. And so as we go through this process, we're getting a little bit more granular. And again, depending on the type of project or the type of situation you're dealing with, this is going to look very different. For you, if you're setting this up for your personal goals for the year, you might just be saying the specific habits that you need to create
Right.
to accomplish the goal. So, like maybe this is, a very cliche example, but maybe the goal is to lose 10 pounds. So, like, one of the habits is you're going to eat a salad every day for lunch. Like, that's a very basic example. But in other situations, you might have like mini goals that aren't necessarily habits, but they're going to help you move forward to those bigger goals. So let's walk through, for one of the goals, let's walk through the objectives that we created under that goal.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, each one of the three things that we just outlined had its own objectives and had its own smaller goals. But we're really going to just focus on the first one, raise money. That was really where most of my work, or our work, really was focused, was on that fundraising campaign. So, under that, we identified three things, which were our smaller goals. The first one was to identify our target giver. So, we really wanted to know who they were, how old they were, all their demographic information. Were they married? How long had they been attending our church? That sort of stuff. We really wanted to know who these people were.
Yeah.
The second thing that we wanted to know about our target giver was, how do they feel? How do they feel about, these potential changes? And it sounds really like advertising-y, but how can we tap into those feelings, and how can we sort of really speak to those to really gain their support for this initiative? And then the next thing is, what are their goals? So, and I'll just give you an example of what I mean by this, but the target demographic that we picked was around the age of 50. So these were people who were more well established, their kids had gone, that sort of thing. That was our target giver. And those people's goals are really sort of oriented towards leaving a legacy. And so that was what we sort of spoke to when we talked about what our target givers' goals were, and that this campaign definitely tapped into the fact that we were leaving a legacy for our church and our children's ministry.
Yeah.
And then the final thing that we sort of talked about, which kind of encapsulates all of those, are why would they even want to give to this? And so we really kind of fleshed all of that stuff out so we could understand who those people were, so that it would advise the other things that we were doing. And then the second thing was, we formulated a fundraising campaign designed to speak to that target giver. So it utilized all the information that we gathered, and we used graphics, we used video, and it was really important for us that we had consistent messaging. So all of the leaders that were talking, anybody on the leadership team, we wanted them to really have consistent messaging. And I don't know that we went as far as scripting, but we came pretty close to that, just so that we could talk all consistently about the same sort of ideas and things that we wanted to push forward. And then the last thing was, obviously, we needed to hold fundraising events. So our church loves a good auction. We have really competitive people, and they really like that. And so that's been a really good moneymaker for us. So we tapped into that. We did an auction of like just general stuff, but our church really loves food. So we also
food.
And we have really good cooks and bakers in our midst. And so we really went full out on that and had a dessert auction. One of our auctions, we had a chili cook-off. So it's really also about knowing what your people like and really tapping into that, because those will be really successful things that you do.
Yeah.
And obviously we had other goals for the other two objectives, as in paint colors, obviously, or the feel of certain rooms, or the vision for certain rooms within the children's wing, that tied into the end goal. But I really wanted to focus on the fundraising part, because that was really, we really utilized strategic mapping for that part.
Yeah. And I think like the objectives that we had under these goals, they had a reason behind them. It wasn't that we were just pulling things out of thin air. We really thought through this. Mm-hmm. And so again, like I said, you can keep this super basic, or you can go more in depth depending on the type of project you're doing. And obviously in this situation, it was a bit more of an in-depth project. Mm-hmm. And I will just say, when we first started talking about this whole idea within our church leadership team, I said, we need someone to spearhead this campaign, and I know who it should be. Because I knew that I was going to get nominated if I didn't say somebody else. So that's what brought Holly in to make this whole thing happen. So I'm just giving you a shout out, Holly.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so
but then I ended up roping you back into it.
Well, I mean, I still helped. I still wanted to help.
Of course you did.
Yeah. Of course.
You're part of the leadership team, so you had to.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so let's move on to step 4. So step 4 is determining who is responsible for each of the items on your plan. And without this, your plan is doomed. Okay. It's if there is not clarity around who is doing what, then there's no way that your plan is going to be accomplished, or it's very likely that things are going to be missed. Time is going to be wasted, money will be wasted. So, again, part of determining who will be doing what is knowing where each person's greatest contribution lies, right? So, just goes back to what we said earlier in the conversation. So, perhaps you're planning a women's ministry event and you're the speaker. You might love creating graphics and designing things, but if that's not like your professional skill set, then it might not make sense for you to be spending time on that. It might make more sense for you to be focusing on the actual content of the event and preparing for the speaking aspect, and then find someone else who can contribute by creating the graphics and the promo materials. So, obviously, there's times, especially in church ministry. I know we're talking more on the ministry side of things here, but I think it can apply in all areas. But there are times where you have to pick up the slack and you have to do multiple jobs. If you're a solopreneur, if you have your own business that and you kind of do what I do where you work from home and you might have a team. I mean, there's times when one of my team members is out and I've got to pick up the slack. I've got to do the work because
Right.
otherwise it's not going to get done. So I recognize the constraints that a lot of us are facing, but I also believe that many of us take on work that we don't need to take on as
Yeah.
leaders. And we often think that we are the only ones that can do something when really that's not true. And what we need to think through is who can I train? Who can I mentor? Who can I delegate to? We talked a lot about this in the episode with you, Holly, and Sandy about
Yeah.
women's ministry. We talked about this idea of when you create a team to accomplish a plan or to do ministry or to run a business, you're going to go a lot further than when you try to do it alone. And you're actually going to be able to use people's strengths and weaknesses a lot better than when you're trying to do it on your own.
Right.
But you will have to let go of control and and allow some mistakes to happen. And that's usually where most of us struggle, right? I know that's where I struggle.
Yeah.
Because I like to have things done a certain way. So I have to be able to let go of things being done my way if I'm going to incorporate a team to accomplish a project or a vision. So back to the main idea of this is that in your strategic plan, you need to identify who is doing what so that everybody is clear on their responsibilities. So for us, Holly, with the Planting Hope Together, what did we have for you want to just talk us through what that looked like for us?
Yeah. So I'm going to go right back to those 3 things I just talked about. So the first one was identify the target giver. That was basically me along with the lead team. So I actually sort of guided them through the process of figuring who this person was and who we really needed to be speaking to. So we walked through this exercise together to really gather this information. And that was really, really important. It's easy to skip this step,
Yeah.
but it was really important because it guided all the other steps that we did. And then the second thing we did was we formulated the fundraising campaign. And those were the graphics and videos and content. That was actually me, Esther, and our friend Sandy. And the reason that we chose those people was because I was sort of spearheading everything. And so I knew all the different parts and pieces. Esther's really good, as you all know, with social media and messaging and all of that sort of thing. And Sandy is a graphic designer. So we knew that through the 3 of us, we could really formulate this campaign that was really designed to speak to what we needed it to speak to. And we would be all working within our zone of genius to actually put this campaign out there and present it to our church. And then the last one was hold the fundraising event. So that was me and Esther. And that's just because we are event planners, man. I had helped plan, numerous women's ministry events and retreats and those sorts of things. And so had Esther. And so we just kind of took the bull by the horns and really made it happen.
Yeah.
I would say, though, if you have any type of project that's within this, I would suggest if you had a third person or an additional person that was good at events, this would be a great idea to delegate those other events to them. I'm not saying that we didn't have that person, but as we sort of went through, it just made the most sense for her and I to do it. But I really think that this is another thing that could be delegated to someone else in your church or your ministry or your business that's really good at event planning or really good at project management. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, when you think about who is going to do what, again, I just want to go back to that idea that Tembi shared with us on her episodes. And we talk about this all the time, but
Yeah.
God has given us all different strengths and weaknesses. And it makes sense whenever possible to utilize people in their strengths
Mm-hmm.
on the plan that you're implementing.
Yeah,
Rather
absolutely.
than trying to put somebody in. We did have some people who were willing to help,
Oh,
but
yeah.
there wasn't somebody that I can recall that had a specific strength in that idea of organizing an event. There were people that were really good at like implementing what we needed to have happen,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual organizational part of it was something that you definitely had a strength in. That's why you kind of ended up being the go-to on that.
Well, and I
So,
think that when I go back to and think about it, our church loves auctions. I've mentioned that before. And so I've organized a few auctions in my
yeah,
day.
yeah,
So that was the other thing. It was super easy for me to pick up and run with this because I had already had I created all the PDFs. I created all of the structure that
yeah,
goes around it. And so that structure I had already created. And so it was
yeah,
super easy to just do it again. And, I felt like I couldn't really dump it on someone else when they didn't have that structure. So,
yeah,
yeah,
right. Okay.
yeah.
So let's move on to step 5. Step 5 is identifying the time frame. So I'm putting this as step 5, but really you kind of want to know what the time frame is way back at the beginning when you're talking about
Yeah.
this. So this isn't necessarily a consecutive step, it's just a step in this whole framework that we're talking about. But you want to make sure that you have identified the time frame of the plan and then also ideally of the smaller goals and objectives that you've identified in the plan. And in some cases, you might be doing like the 90-day plan. In other cases, you might be doing more of a phased plan. And that's really what we did with this project that we're talking about. We had different phases, and the phases had very approximate time frames to them,
Yeah.
which did have to be adjusted. But Holly, you want to just talk through like what we had for the phases of the project?
Yeah. So I think phasing out the project was a really good idea for us because it was a big project and it was something that really needed to have defined boundaries around it. And so I say that on one hand, but then on the other hand, it didn't. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So the first phase for us was fundraising and vision casting. I thought it was really important that we cast a vision for the people in our church so they could really catch what we were headed towards so that they understood how each of the additional phases and all of the projects we were doing fit into that bigger vision casting and as well would advise our fundraising. So if you know where we're headed, then you're more willing to give money towards that. So that was really phase 1, as well as the fact that we couldn't really do phase 2 and 3 without money. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so phase 2 was the children's wing. And I think one of the reasons that we chose the children's wing as phase 2 was that a lot of that work was really cosmetic. And so we could get a lot of bang for our buck for a small amount of money. And it would really start to give momentum to the campaign as people started seeing changes. So while you might think, let's head for the biggest thing and get the biggest chunk done, which in our case was the building project, the new entrance,
Yeah.
we really felt like to give momentum to the campaign and give momentum to our volunteers, our parishioners, the people in our church, we really thought that they needed to see change really fast.
Yeah. And I think too, like we did the children's wing second, but we were still fundraising during that phase.
Right.
And
Right.
so it allowed people to see, oh, something is actually happening with the
Right.
money I'm giving. So that was the
Yeah.
other. I mean, they would have still seen that when we were doing the entrance too, but like you said,
Yeah.
we're able to spend less money and get faster results by doing the children's wing first.
Right. And then the third phase was obviously the building project. And since the church is in Maine, you can't really break ground in the middle of wintertime. So
Yeah.
that was part of it. But it was important for us, like I said, to have these defined phases. However, as Esther just mentioned, we were doing things right from the beginning on the building. Like while we were getting those really quick changes in the children's wing, we were sort of digging out footers for, I don't even know what they're called because I'm not construction, but like the pillars that hold the building up,
Outside.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So while these they were defined phases, there was a bit of overlap. And I think that that's okay for the type of project that we were doing. But perhaps for your type of project, you really need to get phase one done 100% before you start phase two.
Yep.
And I think that just comes with discernment and sort of understanding your project. But for us, it was okay that we sort of were picking away at all three at the same time with the goal to finish phase one up more quickly, let's say, than phase two.
Yeah.
And then that we really wanted to have phase two done while we were sort of in the middle of phase three. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just kind of bring this back to more if you're doing more of personal goal planning or business goal planning. Like for me, what works well for me when I'm looking at my planning for the year is making that overall vision for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then breaking it up into my quarterly planning. So like planning for Q1, January, February, March. And I know you're listening to this in February, so you might be like, oh no, it's already 1 month is already over, but that's okay. You can do this at any time. Like you don't have to be constrained to a specific start date. Just start whenever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Honestly, I haven't, as the time we're recording this, I haven't fully fleshed out my Q1 plan yet. It's kind of stressing me out, but I know, I know I'm going to do it. So
you'll get there.
So anyway, the point is like you got to do what works for you. And we've talked about this before on the different goal episodes we've had, but don't feel like you have to follow our exact format or our exact plan here. But 90 days is a good time frame. I know there's books about it, the 12-week year, the different things that we've talked about that talk about the reasoning for not trying to make a plan for the whole year, because for most of us, that just doesn't work. So let's move on to step 6. That is going to be evaluating and updating the plan. So this is a really key part of the process because very likely you're going to run into some roadblocks. You're going to run into some things that don't work out. On the off chance you actually accomplish something faster, you might be able to make adjustments that way. So, you need to take time before your time frame is up. So let's say you choose 3 months or 90 days for your goal time frame. Maybe a couple weeks before that time is up, you sit down and you review the plan and review where you're at and say, okay, what goals did I accomplish? Which objectives did we get done? Then yay, celebrate that. But if not, if you didn't get them done, or there's certain ones that you still need to finish up, then you're going to want to put those into your new plan, just updating your plan. Then also considering, are there new goals that you want to accomplish that will move you closer to that end vision? So if you're thinking about it for a full year, you might already have in your mind, okay, I know in the first quarter, I'm going to do this, second quarter, I'm going to do this. So you kind of break it up and now you're going to add in that next set of goals that you need to accomplish.
Yeah.
So with Planting Hope Together, we had to evaluate and make some changes, right, Holly? Do you want to just explain one of the examples of how that worked out?
Yeah. So just really quickly, and I'm sure you guys know, this is a pretty easy example, but the pricing of supplies and work to do specific projects actually changed from the beginning budget that we had sort of talked through to the actual time that we did the work. So at that point, we kind of had to decide what things were most important. So we decided, for us, we found that it was really important not to change that total amount that we needed raised, but rather we decided to just reevaluate our priorities within each of the building phases so that we could still hit our core objectives with each section, but just maybe prioritizing them a little bit better. So for example, I believe the changes in updating the bathroom or the pricing for updating the bathroom in that children's wing changed. And with any building project, you have to know that that's going to happen because as you take things apart, you find stuff that you didn't know was there. So when we got to this point, we decided that it was really crucial to have a good bathroom and have that be up to date. So we just made choices and changes in other areas to make up that difference. Because as we kind of prioritize what we were thinking about the children's wing, obviously we need to have someplace that's clean and, well laid out and is thinking about all the different aspects of what our children's wing would need. And we all know that if we've ever worked in children's ministry, you need to have a good bathroom. So
yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a top priority. Yeah. Yeah. So making those evaluations, and sometimes you're doing this during the project, right? You're doing it during the actual time frame. But then if you haven't evaluated, then before that timeline runs out, it's good to put it on the calendar to just take time to reflect and update.
Right.
So that walks us through the 6 steps. I hope you don't feel overwhelmed in listening to this and thinking, oh my word, this is so much work. Like, I don't want you to feel that way. And I hope if you go back to the show notes, you'll see, I know we've talked about a lot of details in our specific example, but again, if you work through this on your own, I promise you can probably create a plan in less than an hour, to work on a project of your own. So I just want to address the question though, like, what about the times when you're working with a team or yourself and there's resistance to this idea of creating a strategic plan? Like, Holly, have you felt that resistance or seen that take place in teams or in your own life?
Yes. So not specifically with Planting Hope Together. I think that kind of came right from the get-go. Like, if we want to do this, we really need to have a plan.
Yeah.
So no, but I have in past projects that I've done in business had this pushback and people were like, well, we're just going to wing it, or we'll just kind of see how it goes, or those sorts of things. And for planners like me and Esther, those statements really like make us cringe, but
yeah.
So yes.
Yeah. And I will say in some of the work that I do with my own clients and what I've done for the past few years is a big part of my role in their businesses has been helping them actually make a plan for how they want to accomplish something. Like, I work with a lot of visionaries, a lot of those people that are very creative and have a million ideas and want to just be able to adapt and change left and right all the time. And I like working with those people, but what we have found and what I think is really effective is to still make a plan, to still say, let's still create a general framework of where we're going and where you want to focus in your business or in your ministry or whatever it is, but leave room for the flexibility to add something or remove something if it is necessary. So having that structure there, but still allowing for some flexibility. And then on the flip side of things, for someone like me who tends to be a lot more like, I want that exact plan, step by step, day by day, exactly what I'm doing, I have to allow myself and give myself grace to know that it's probably not going to happen that way. And I might make the most detailed plan and then, oh, wait a minute, you mean I can't create 17 new things in 1 week? I mean... So part of it is knowing yourself, knowing the team that you're working with, or knowing the type of people that you have in your ministry. But we still think that creating this plan is going to help you simplify things, even though it might feel initially, especially if you're a creative person, it might feel like it's making it more complicated because you're just like, well, let's just do it. Let's just get it done.
Yeah.
There are those people that just love just jumping in. But at the same time, when you create that plan, it's going to actually give you more peace of mind in the end that you know where you're headed.
Have you ever had a project that has gone 100% to plan from the beginning to the end?
I don't think so.
I think it's important to remember that this is going to happen. Even if it's with yourself, these sorts of things are going to happen. Things are going to pop up in the middle that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
Especially in business, things pop up in the middle of a plan that you're doing and you're like, oh no, I have to totally change everything or I need to make a tweak. And so I think it's really important that we are talking about this because I think pushback from others or resistance or even trying to get your own self on task, that self-leadership can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to remember either to give yourself the structure that you need, or give, the group the structure that they need, or give grace. Like, I
Yeah.
think that that's a discernment thing, and also a personality thing. We talked about visionaries and, people who like to jump right in. Knowing those things about people that you work with is really important to kind of plan for some of this pushback and resistance. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one more thing that I didn't mention, but is an important consideration is just capacity.
yeah,
What is the capacity of yourself? If you're just making your plan for yourself, what's your own capacity? Or what's the capacity of your team or your ministry or your business? Because sometimes, and again, this can happen to me, I will over commit and think I can do more than I actually can. And we talked about
yeah,
that on the reflection episode. And likewise, I find very often visionaries, especially leaders of churches, leaders of ministries who have this big vision, they will not necessarily naturally recognize how much work it's going to take to accomplish a goal.
yeah.
And so
Hmm.
they will just assume that we can get this done in 2 months and it's like a
Right.
6-month project. So the point I want to make is that sometimes you need another person involved, at least one other person to bounce this plan off of to make
Yeah.
sure that it's realistic. I mean, my client will bring something to me and say, "This is what I want to do." And I will say, "Okay, that sounds awesome. It's probably going to take this and this and this and this and this. And let's realistically figure out, can we do that right now?" So,
Yeah.
anyway.
And I like the idea that you sort of put in there, having different types of people, because when you tell a visionary that in their mind, when they've already decided they want to do something and it takes 2 months, and you say this is probably going to take 6, I know from having a little bit of that in myself, that takes the wind right out of your sails and you can get
Yeah.
really deflated and defeated. But if you have someone who knows how to implement things, you can really keep it on track, and you can really sort of keep those visionaries from getting discouraged. So,
Yeah.
we've talked about this before, but having different people with different strengths on a team is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, we're going to wrap this up and we just want to encourage you and hope that this whole conversation has helped you to see that creating a strategic plan does not have to be super complicated and that it will help simplify your ministry or your business. And, that will help you to know what you're focusing on and what you're not focusing on. And again, hopefully help you to not spend time on things that aren't super important, like
Right.
cleaning out the kitchen cabinets. So, so what we want you to do is take action, and we want you to just set aside some time if you can in the next week and sit down and create your plan. If you haven't done this for yourself for the year and your own goals, this would be a good time to do that. Or if you have a business or something else that you're leading or your team, maybe you set a time for a team meeting and you create a plan as a team for a specific project. And I just want to mention that if you need individualized help with creating your strategic plan, Holly and I are willing to help out with that. Those are
Yeah.
services that we either offer currently or are going to be offering
Yep.
soon. So if you're a Christian business owner and you want help creating a strategic plan within your business, you can reach out to me. And if you are a ministry or a church that would like some help with this process and kind of working through whether it's a specific project like we just talked about in our
Mhm.
example, or if it is a more strategic plan for the overall organization, that's something that Holly is going to be able to offer very soon. And
Yeah.
so we'll put our email addresses in the show notes. And that's probably the best way for you to reach out if you would like to learn more about these options and whether that would be a good fit for you. You can reach out to us and contact us that way. So,
Yeah. We'd love to help you go through that process,
yeah.
because that's
And
like, we really enjoy that.
yeah. And really, and kind of what we're referring to with that is the strategic mapping that I
Yes.
mentioned that we both are or will be certified in through the program that we went through with Natalie Gingrich. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun. I love creating plans. I mean,
Me
I
too.
could plan all day.
Yep.
So nerd alert. All
Yeah.
right. So we're going to wrap up our conversation here with our fun question. So, Holly, what is our question today?
Okay. You have to answer this first.
Okay.
Okay. When you were younger, did you wish you had a different name? And if so, what was it and why?
Okay. So, yes, I did wish I had a different name because two reasons. One is that my name, Esther, can become a nickname of all kinds by simply adding a different
Oh,
consonant on the front of the word. So,
yes.
Lester, Chester, Nestor, Fester, you name it. I was called all the things. Okay. So that's one. So I didn't like the weird names that people call me.
Yeah.
And then I also was really obsessed with Anne of Green Gables and the movie, and I loved Diana. I just thought Diana was like beautiful,
Oh,
and I just always dreamed of being Diana. And so that was whenever I would play like a makeup game, a pretend
yep.
game with my friends, I was always Diana. So it's
I
not
love that.
actually the name that I would want to like. Now I'm fine with my name, but back when I was younger, I thought that Diana was much more exquisite and refined.
She was pretty great.
Yeah. And you can't really add another consonant on front of Diana to call her something
This is
different.
true.
So,
This is true.
yeah.
But you could call her Diana Banana. That doesn't really rhyme. Diana.
Yeah,
I don't know.
harder.
I'm not good at making those up.
So what about you? Did you wish that you had a different name?
So I did. This is so hard. So I did wish that I had a different name, but I don't remember ever landing on one that kind of stuck. Like whatever I was either obsessed with or enjoyed at that time, that's probably what my name was.
Yeah.
But it's really funny that you mention Anne of Green Gables because as we were talking about this, that was the immediate reference I picked up because when Marilla says to her, "What's your name, girl?" And she said, "Will you please call me Cordelia?" And she's like, "Call you Cordelia? What's your name?" That's so me. But
yes.
the part that is not me or that didn't actually happen was I never really stuck with a name.
Yeah.
It was always just whatever it was at the time.
Okay, now that we're talking about Anne of Green Gables, who did you resonate with? Did you resonate with Anne?
Oh, Anne, 100%.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, I was Anne through and through. I still am.
Yeah. I think Anne is an Enneagram 4.
Yeah. I love her. I wish I could
She's
still
amazing.
be her. She's my favorite. But it's really funny to actually watch. I watched it with my son multiple times and he is so hysterical. He just rolls his eyes and laughs when she's being so dramatic. And he'll just be like, "Oh, she's so dramatic." And then he'll just look at me like, "Yeah, you're that same way too, Mom. I am very dramatic." Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I love it.
Oh, well.
Yes. Well, embrace who you are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was somebody different every week, so at least you stuck with it.
Oh, my word. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, once again, we thank you for listening to this episode. And if you made it to this end point, congratulations. Bonus points for you.
You deserve a medal.
Yes. Now, we do want to mention that if you made it this far, you need to be part of our Purposeful Leadership Facebook group.
Yeah.
Because that's where you get to come and hang out and we actually get to hear from you. Like on the podcast, we're talking to each other, but we don't actually get to hear from you. And so we love in the group, we actually get to hear or see what you type and read your words and get to know you better. So please come in and join us. You'll find the way to get into that group in our show notes for this episode. And we look forward to talking to you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Women Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, come and join us in our private Facebook community. We would love to get to know you better so that we can make sure the podcast is providing what you need. Plus, you can share your questions and ideas, and you'll be surrounded by incredible Christian women leaders. To join the group, visit estherlittlefield.com/group. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.